we'll discuss little more about constraints as well as non-constraints also. Though the topic constraints no more, it is not enough to know only about constraints. I'm sure that you are well aware about the definitions. I don't need to tell them what constraints is. You already know a lot about the topic. So you must be wondering what made me to choose this topic at all. The reason is simple. I would like to remind you what Dr. Kozak once said. Never say I know. It means even if we believe that we know a subject well, there is a good possibility that there are some gaps in our knowledge. So perhaps today's discussion will fill those gaps in your knowledge. Maybe you'll enjoy them, maybe you'll learn something new, or it could be a kind of refresher thing for you, right? So now coming back to our topic, constraints no more. I just want to remind you that since the five focusing steps are highly logical and intuitive, people believe that it is a matter of common sense. True, it is a matter of common sense, but common sense is not something that is commonly held. Many people think, and even they say, proclaim, that they naturally follow those five focusing steps almost every day. In a way, they are right, because the dictionary defines constraint as a restriction or an obstacle. So, according to this definition, they are right. Almost every manager trying to meet his targets is dealing with some obstacles or the other, and he keeps removing them. Right. So then what is the difference? We tend to use these terms interchangeably, particularly those who do not know TOC. For them, constraint, obstacles, everything is same. So they are used interchangeably. So we need to clearly define the terms or be very precise about the understanding, the way we understand them. A limitation which can be removed immediately after identification is just an obstacle. You need some effort, something is required to be done and it gets removed. Whereas a constraint is something which cannot be removed so quickly. It takes significant amount of time. I'm not saying long amount of time, but significant amount of time. So it is it is easy for a layman to understand the difference between obstacle and constraint. Obstacle, you can move it quickly. Constraint, you need some more efforts. So whenever you are talking to people, and if you find that they are using these terms interchangeably, you can tell them this difference. Now, let us see the difference between a constraint and the bottleneck. Again, these terms are used interchangeably, but there is a subtle difference between the two. Bottleneck is a resource with with capacity less or equal to the demand on that resource. A constraint is a limiting factor to organization's performance in achieving its goal. See the difference. Bottleneck could be at a very local level that other resources before and after have more capacity, so they are demanding you more and more from a particular resource which it is not able to do. So that resource becomes a bottleneck for that process. Whereas constraint is limiting the organization's performance. So that is the difference. So a constraint can be called bottleneck, but bottleneck is not always a constraint. I think we need to take an example here so that it becomes very clear. Okay, let me take an example. I'll share the screen and I want to show you one diagram which probably Michael might know. It is created by Richard Homan. Do you know this, Michael? This particular diagram, or you know this person? Chris Homan?
Yes, I know it, yes.
Yes. Now let us have a look at this diagram. It explains very well what the difference between between a constraint and a bottleneck. Now, here is a process in a factory. There is a sub-assembly which consists of three resources, resource A, B, and C. There is a parallel resource called D, and the output of this sub-assembly and the output of D meet with a resource A for final assembly. Then there is some process after that which is done by resource F. Now the market demand is 100 units, right? Now if you look at the sub-assembly and if you look at the whole picture, are you in a position to determine which is the constraint and which is the bottleneck? Any answers? Okay, look at the capacities. Resource A has capacity to process 110 units and our demand is 100 units. Resource B has a capacity of 80 units. Resource C has capacity of 120 units. D also has capacity of 120 units. E has the capacity of 60 units and F has capacity of 190 units. So where is the bottleneck and where is the constraint? Please tell me.
E should be the bottleneck.
Right. And sorry, which is what?
E will be yes.
E is the E is the constraint and B is the bottleneck.
Who said this?
This is Deepak here.
Yes, Deepak, you are absolutely right. Sorry, I couldn't recognize your voice. Sorry for that. But you are absolutely right. Why? Because resource B is limitation for that sub-assembly only. But resource E is stopping the overall performance of the organization because there is a demand for 100 units and at best it is able to process only 60 units. So it's good to know the difference between bottleneck and constraint. Now,
Rajiv,
yes.
Just to extend the point, if B had a capacity of 40 and not 80, then B would have been the bottleneck as well as the constraint, because then that 40 would have been the sub-assembly capacity and that would have then constrained your overall performance.
You are correct. So that's why I said that you can call a constraint as bottleneck also, because constraint is a bottleneck also. But bottleneck is not necessarily the constraint.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Now let us quickly run through the definition. The original definition of constraint is anything that limits the performance of the system versus the goal, system's goal. Now, if you strictly go by this definition, there are three possibilities. The possibility number one, it could be a physical limitation. That is a particular resource or machine or department. Well, the second possibility, it could be erroneous possibilities. The policies. We have some wrong policies, and which is limiting the performance of the system. And third could be we had some flawed paradigm, or we lack some ideas, which is limiting our performance. So if we go by the original definition that anything that limits the performance of the system versus its goal, there are three possibilities. But Dr. Goddard never meant all these three. So therefore, TOC-ICO refined this definition. And now the definition, official definition given in TOC-ICO dictionary is the factor that ultimately limits the performance of a system of an organization in the constraint. The factor that if the organization were able to increase it, more fully exploit it, or more effectively subordinate to it, would result in achieving more of the goal. It means the constraint is a physical resource. We can apply those 5 focusing steps. We can exploit it, we can subordinate to that decision, we can elevate it. So it automatically removes the erroneous policies or flawed paradigms because we cannot apply 5 focusing steps on those things. So this is the new definition. It's not very new, but we need to understand the difference between the two. We always say that constraint is a leverage point. So do we really know what the leverage point means? And as we said that bottleneck may not be a constraint. Constraint is a bottleneck, but bottleneck may not be a constraint. Okay, constraint is a leverage point, but I would rather add that it is okay. Leverage point is not necessarily a constraint. As we say, a constraint is a bottleneck, but a bottleneck did not be a constraint. It is not necessarily a constraint. Similarly, your constraint is a leverage point, but leverage point is not necessarily a constraint. Let's know a little more about leverage point. The famous statement by the Archimedes, used by Dr. Goldratt also. If I find a leverage point, I can move the earth. This is just to indicate the power of leverage point. Now we talk the similar thing in terms of constraint also. So they are going very close to each other. Let's see a little more about this. Now let us try to understand what is constraint that we know, but what is leverage point. Dunlop Meadows had defined it that leverage points are places in a system where a small shift in one thing can produce big changes in everything. Now, this is something closer to, again, constraint. Constraint is also a place, it's a small change at one place and it creates a huge result. But then we don't say constraint, we talk about a constraint. We believe that every organization has at least one constraint. If there are more independent flows, then there are 2 or 3 or whatever number of constraints. But as far as leverage points are concerned, it did not be only one. There is no limit for that. In fact, there is an analogy of acupressure points. If you are aware of this acupuncture, there are several places in our body where if we adequately press at those points, we get a fantastic result. Okay, so the second definition that I came across is the leverage about leverage points is that they are like acupuncture points, places where a finely tuned strategic intervention is capable of creating lasting change, creating positive effects that spread far and wide. Now again, the definition is very close to constraint, but again, it is not saying that there is just one constraint, just one acupressure, or there is one leverage point. So that is the difference that we have between constraint and leverage point, right? Now let us talk about this thing that how do we identify leverage points? We know how to identify constraint. We know it very well. But how do we identify the leverage points? Is there any way? I think somebody else is writing? No. Okay. So let me continue. I would say that you can ask certain questions. Some examples I would give. Well, let me admit that I am not mastered about the theory of leverage points, but I done some brief analysis, brief study, and I came across some good questions. Questions are like, why would someone want to buy what I'm selling? How is what I'm selling perceived by my target customer? What makes it different? How does my solution address a customer's needs better than any other solution available? Do my target customers have unmet needs in areas adjacent to my solution? Can I address those? So these are examples. This is not a waste. It's the only way to go about it. These are some of the questions to identify the leverage point. They could be anywhere. It is far easy to identify constraint, but it is not easy to identify leverage points They are there, but you may not see them. I would like to give, one or two small examples which I perceive to be right. You know, there's one express highway between Mumbai and Pune. Some of you might know. No, before that highway was there were hotels, alongside the old highway. They never realized that they are strategically located. Supposing you have a hotel near airport, it could be a strategic location. It could be a leverage point for you. Or if you have some new technology which nobody else had, remember the days of Nokia? It became world famous. It was a small company, I think, in Finland, and the mobile phones were used all over the world. Why? Because they had that leverage point. Of course, it didn't last long, and other companies had discovered, they invented even better technology. So that technology became their leverage point. So like that, there could be several leverage points in your organization, and from time to time they might change also. Right? Now, having talked so much about leverage points, let me come back to our topic of constraints, right? So, what I want to share with you about constraints. There are constraints and constraints and constraints everywhere. That is a common belief, that people think that there are constraints everywhere. Everywhere there are constraints. Some people say, if I look at production, there are constraints. If I look at sales, there are constraints. If I look at any different department in my organization, I find constraints. So the question is, how many constraints are there? Every manager feels that as though he is a swimming pool with about 100 ping pong balls which are floating, and his job is to keep all of them under the water at the same time. Okay, can you imagine that? Imagine the swimming pool, there are hundreds of ping pong balls, they are floating, and you are there and trying to press them down so that all of them remain under the water. This is the feel that they get, and that's why they feel that there are so many constraints. But then how many constraints we must have? So how many constraints that we must have? So how many constraints are there? How many constraints that we must have? Common belief is that, and it is true to a large extent, that typically organizations have only one constraint or maybe few constraints. Why few or why more than one? Because there could be some independent flows or independent business lines, but under one corporate head. But typically, there is only one constraint in an organization. Now, what I would like to stress that every organization must have at least two constraints. A strange statement, a contradictory statement, but I'm not challenging Dr. Goldratt or anybody else, but just be patient with me and you will understand and you'll agree with me. See, a constraint is what? It is a continuous blockage to flow. And there are two kinds of flows in any organization. Two kinds of flows. What are those? One is the current flow, the value flow, determining the short-term performance. What does it mean? The current business that you are running, you are producing something, you are selling to your customer, and that flow, right? And in that flow, there is some constraint, maybe in market, maybe in your manufacturing or wherever. So you are trying to apply 5 focusing steps and they get maximum out of it. So that is your current flow, right? But there is one more flow that is required to be there in every organization. That is called the flow of initiatives. What those initiatives are? This flow of initiatives is designing the future of the organization. Remember, what is our goal? To make more money now as well as in the future. We are making more money now by applying 5 focusing steps or TOC solutions to our current business. But for our future business, for our future growth, we need to elevate also. So elevation is just not going and buying some capacity, right? So you need to improve several things. So there could be n number of initiatives should be going on in your organization. So these are the two flows that every organization must have. This second flow, this flow of initiative, it considers the actual strategy, the plan for the superior future state. So here, the ultimate constraint could be management attention. Some time ago, there was a debate, I think on LinkedIn or on some other sites also, that this statement was made that the ultimate constraint is management attention. Some people challenge it, some people were in favor of it. But I would say that what is my take out of it is that as far as the future of the business is concerned, okay, management attention could be the constraint because it's up to them to start this flow of initiative. So that's why I make a statement that every organization must have two constraints. One is in the current flow of value, that is the products and information, and the second is for the future, the new initiatives or the future that to which they want their business to transform. Now, after having said that, I would like to dwell upon this question as to where should the constraint reside. What does it mean?
Rajiv, I have a question.
Yeah.
The term management attention is a little bit abstract. Can you make it slightly more specific? What does management attention really mean?
Certainly. First of all, okay, let me talk about the management attention that is required in the current flow. That is, supposing you have implemented TOC and there is, let me take one example. Your organization is a project organization. You are running hundreds of projects, and there are lots of issues. See, every project, when you start one new project, you are making at least 3 promises. That is, one is about the scope, second is about the schedule, and third about the budget. And while doing that, there are several issues come up. Some projects are going on going on time. Some projects have problems, they are late. Now it is very difficult to know where to pay attention. So there, your CCPM enables the top management, guides them to the point. See, this is the importance of CCPM, or TOC's measurement, that they guide the concerned people to the point where their attention is required. So that problem of not knowing where to pay attention, so they pay attention, whatever is burning in front of them, they pay attention to it. So that problem is largely solved by applying TOC solutions. But what about the flow of future initiatives? Which initiatives to start? What we should be doing? There could be hundreds of ideas. Our people, believe me, people are highly creative. They dream a lot, and they are very creative, and they can come up with some brilliant ideas. Now the idea is good, bad, or ugly. If it is practical, not practical, what all is required, and which idea to take and go forward is the call that is to be taken by the top management. Now, if there are too many things in front of them and they are not streamlined, they are not following any particular method of managing this initiative, then management attention becomes a problem. Their attention is thinly divided. Then they happen to distribute their resources thinly, and nothing moves. So from that point of view, management attention becomes the ultimate concept for the future.
But Rajiv, if you go with the definition of something which can be exploited and can be subordinated to, in this case, what does it mean, subordinate to management attention? And secondly, are we talking about quality of thinking, or are we talking about quantity of managers? Because that's where the abstraction is coming in.
Yeah. Now here, again, management attention is not a physical thing, right? So as per the revised definition of TOC-ICO, this cannot be the constraint. This doesn't follow the definition of exploiting and other steps. But this statement draws the attention that management has to do something differently, keeping in line with the TOC principle. Otherwise, it's a risk. Personally, why personally? As per the definition, this is not a constraint. But this could become, I don't know whether I can call it as a leverage point, management ability, management IQ. There are, ideas could become a leverage point for the future. Could. So it is not a constraint, that is for certain. But it is called, ultimate constraint because that could stop, or we can call it ultimate leverage point for the future. All right?
Yeah, thank you. I think with that qualification, we should move on.
Thank you. So now the question is, where should the constraint reside? Why this question, even I'm asking? As we know, when we start implementing TOC, we try to find the constraint, right? We try to identify. But when we come to the elevation part of it, we realize that now is the time when we can really choose where we want to locate it. We can elevate certain resources more, certain resources less, and actually shift the constraint to the place where we desire. So this raises an interesting question. Where is the best place to have the constraint? Should it be at the beginning? Or should it be at the end? Should it be in the middle? Or it should be outside in the market? Let's explore a bit. If the constraint is at the beginning, are you more or less responsive to customer demand? Could be less, because it takes time to move the product through the system. This means that you are doing something, okay, or constraint is at the beginning, you are exploiting and all that, but customer comes up with something which is not there in the process. So you have to start from the beginning all over again. So okay, let's go to the other extreme. If the constraint is at the end, are you more or less responsive? I'm sorry, the word is responsible, that is wrong. I mean, responsive to the customer demand. Again, okay, we could be less responsive if the material in your buffer is not the right item, or you have to, and you have to clean out the entire buffer before you can get the right part of it. Then should it be in the middle, the best of both worlds or something? Oh, well, there doesn't seem to be any right answer as such, but there is. But the answer actually depends a lot upon the physical system you are dealing with. Now, what do you mean the physical system? If it is a factory, there are different types of layouts. We call them VATI. But then I'm not getting into that because then I'll be talking more about manufacturing. I'll just talk something in general. So what we can really look at is that what are the factors that we need to consider for choosing the best location for the constraint. First is capacity. How hard is it to get? Okay, how much does it cost? So just an example, that do you want the constraint to be a $10,000 drill or $100,000 mill? The answer could be different for different companies, but this is one of the considerations, that how hard is it to get. Second is predictability. The constraint that you want to choose. Okay, what do you expect? It should produce 5 plus minus 5. That kind of variability is acceptable to you, or you are okay with 5 plus minus 1. Typically, people will say 5 plus minus 1. So, but it may not be always that. So, that predictability, how important it is. It is important. So, because there are processes which are highly volatile. So, you would not like to choose them as constraints. Howsoever you may want them, but you will say that I just can't predict. Then quality and scrap. Now, if you choose a particular say, part of your organization as constraint, then you have to look at it that after the constraint process, what you want to make it sure that there is a zero scrap. Why? Because if something gets scrapped, the constraint time gets wasted and you are losing on throughput. So, and also you want to know that can we resolve the quality issues before the chosen constraint so that when the material is being processed by the constraint, they don't get rejected because of the bad quality. So with this three, there is one more, the ease of expansion. In the sense that you want to expand now, you have done, you expanded, you are subordinated, now you have come to the stage of elevation. Now, in order to expand on this particular constraint, you will have to buy another building. Is it that? So maybe that could be the consideration. So while choosing, now see, when you are doing exploitation, you have a chance to decide where the constraint should be. So you have to look at various options and various considerations. There could be even more specific to particular businesses also. Now there is a question that is asked that should the constraint be external or it should be internal? Now, people have different opinion about it. So I would like to take a quick poll.
I have a slight conceptual question on this. Where should the constraint be?
Yeah.
To my mind, the constraint is where it is. This is a little bit hypothetical to say where should the constraint be, because by definition, you want to maximize your profits, making money now and for the future. And with that goal, you set up a system. And because you're not into an infinite situation, there is a constraint by definition.
Yeah.
Therefore, a constraint just exists. It's a question of identifying it and then the rest of the focusing steps. Exploiting it, subordinating it, elevating it.
Correct.
So to me, this is a little bit of an infructuous question.
No. Here, when you elevate, you have a choice. And you can keep it at the same place, or you can shift it at some other desired place.
No. So, for example, an external constraint is a market constraint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
Now, how can a market constraint be really exploited and subordinated to in the real sense? When
we're exploiting market constraint, what we mean that we deliver 100% orders in time, 100%, not 99.99%. We don't waste a single opportunity. That is what we mean by exploiting. And there is another school of thought over here that it says that there is nothing like external constraint. Okay, when we say the constraint is in market and you are in a big enough market, it means the constraint is in your internal sales and marketing department. They are not able to get more orders. This is another point that I wanted to bring, but I think I'm running out of time and there's lot to discuss, so I just skipped on that. Deepak? Yeah. So should we move ahead?
Yeah, please. Food for thought.
Session on constraints no more. I made a mistake. Let me correct it now. While discussing where the constraint should be located or reside, we agreed that the constraint should be internal, that is, inside the organization, and not external, that is, in the market. The reason could be that if the constraint is internal, we have full control over it. We can easily decide and execute the actions needed for exploitation and subordination. If the constraint is external, that is, if it is in the market, we are likely to have little control over it. But there is other side to it. If you want to serve your customers well, you must have capacity that is somewhat more than the demand. If the constraint is internal, it would mean you are getting more orders than what you can really fulfill in a window of time. You will always struggle to meet customers' delivery expectations, and it will not only impact on time delivery, but it may also impact uh, uh, the quality. If you have more capacity than the market demand, it would be easier for you to deal with sudden peaks or spikes in the demand. It would be easier for you to delight your customers by meeting some urgent request coming in from them. During elevation phase, you are likely to take steps that will increase the demand. You may start an advertising campaign or decide to enter into some new markets or expand on your dealer network, etc., etc., etc. Now, it could be difficult to predict how much demand will increase and by when, whereas the elevation of internal constraint is far more predictable. But as the demand starts increasing, you anyway have some excess capacity to handle it, and that could indicate you to increase your internal capacity so that you once again have more capacity than the orders that you are receiving. It is true that it would be somewhat difficult to manage an external constraint. The behavior could be unpredictable. However, it is better to deal with it rather than constantly fighting to keep your delivery promises. Because not being able to keep your customers happy could have a devastating effect on your business. Of course, it does not mean that if the constraint is in the market, we don't need to do anything internally. There would be some bottlenecks internally, and we can prioritize to improve them considering the subordination required by the market constraint. So, my conclusion is keep the constraint in the market and subordinate your organization to the exploiting decision. Thank you. Now the question is, should we schedule the constraint at 100% capacity? No, wait, just hold on. Let me just quickly remind you what I mean. You are familiar with 5 focusing steps, so I need not run through that. I want to emphasize the step number 2, decide how to exploit the constraint. And it means that we don't waste the constraint time. Exploit means get the most. It is a harsh term, but just to convey that we really need to extract maximum, then exploit no matter what it takes, no mercy, squeeze the maximum, then achieve the best possible output and so on. Now remember that by keeping the constraint idle even for a few minutes every day, you are losing on throughput. Now, in that context, I would like to know what is your opinion. Should we schedule the constraint at 100% capacity? Yes or no?
I think so. We should keep it at 100%.
Okay.
Because in case there is a fallback, you need to ensure that the flow is maintained.
Okay.
Meaning we should not break the constraint in trying to get 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine. Good. Okay. So let's continue with this thing. Now, there's a small quiz on this. Let's suppose you have the capacity to produce 100 units per day at 100% capacity. You decide to load the constraint at 90%, not 100%. As you said, we should not do that. Fine. Now the constraint goes down for 1 day. Tell me, how long will it take for you to catch up? Now you calculate and tell me, please.
10 days.
10 days. Good answer. You are correct. Now let's move a little further. Those who are not able to calculate now, will get another chance. Again, the same thing. Instead of 90%, the constraint is loaded at 95% capacity. Again, the constraint goes down for 1 day. How long will it take for you to catch up? Instead of 90, now I'm saying 95%. Okay, you are loaded. But tell me.
20 days.
Correct. You are far too smart people. Now, if it is loaded at 99% of the capacity, how long it will take? It will take 100 days to recover. And by God forbid, if you load it at 100% and it goes down for 1 day, you will never be able to catch up. So that is why we should never load the constraint at 100%. But then what do? We should consider two things. Do not load the constraint at 100%. Again, I'm repeating. Now, what does that mean actually? I'm not saying don't use the constraint 100%. I'm saying don't load. When you load the constraint, in my definition, see, when I take the orders, I make some commitment. So I take into account the capacity of the constraint and make the commitment. So while making the commitments, I'll take into account the 90% or 80% of water capacity that I want to, and accordingly, I will make the commitment. It means I will have some spare capacity to take care of variability in the constraint or some urgent orders coming in, so that the queue doesn't increase unnecessarily. Now, does that mean that this extra time remains idle at times? I said no. We release the material as per our plan. Maybe if everything goes fine and there are no interruptions in the constraint, we will be ready ahead of the schedule. You may deliver it ahead or not, that is another question. But by rule, we will not load it 100%, we will load it lower than that, so that if there are any mishaps, we have time to catch up. If there are no mishaps, then we can deliver faster. To load the constraint according to in accordance with the variability in the constraint operation. So if you ask me, what is the good number? Is 90% fine, or I should load only 80%? There is no, there is no one answer to this. It depends on the variability of the constraint in your operation, which may change over a period of time. To begin with, it may be very high variability. Now you have improved the constraint, improved the quality, improved the maintenance, everything, and now variability is low. So accordingly, it can shift. So we should not load the constraint at 100%. We load it at the percent where we can take the variability of the constraint operation, and maybe the frequency of urgent orders that we might get. There could be some businesses where suddenly some customers have fire, and they say, no, you give this to us the next 3 days or something, and you would like to cater for this for this request. So consider all that, and according to you load, meaning you commit based on that capacity and not on 100% capacity. The other consideration is the subordination that you are doing. What does it mean in simple words is that dance at the tune of the constraint. Run faster if constraint runs faster, and slow down when the constraint slows down. So there is no pile up of inventory if the constraint is down. Yeah, so you know all this subordination. I don't have to tell you this. So my conclusion is we should not load the constraint at 100%. We should load it at such capacity where we are comfortable to manage variability of the constraint. And for the non-constraints, they look at the constraint and respond to the needs of the constraint. Now we have talked so much about constraints. Now we must talk about non-constraints also. They are also important. Non-constraint does not mean they are unimportant, right? So non-constraints, by definition, have more capacity than the constraint, right? So if we lose some time on non-constraint, we can make it up. So what is their role? Why are they considered to be important? If they have more capacity, we can always catch up. Then why do we even talk about them? The importance and the role of the non-constraints have been defined in the third step of 5 focusing steps. Subordinate everything else to the above decision of exploiting. If this is not done and constraints work at their own pace, you know what mess it will create. So they are important, there is no doubt about it. So if that is the case, the question is, where should we focus our improvement efforts? Now answer is very obvious, very obvious. The answer is, of course, on the constraint. We must focus all our improvement efforts on constraint. Fine. And what about non-constraints? To improve or not to improve? That's the question. Should we never improve non-constraints? What's that? Right? Now let us think more about this. What happens when you reduce the processing time of the constraint, or you enable the constraint to do the work faster, or you improve the quality at the constraint? Obviously, then you are able to produce more, and as a result, you are likely to increase throughput. But what if you improve a non-constraint? What happens? It may create more excess capacity for that resource, the resource that you improve, which may not be needed. It may be a waste of efforts on your part. So does it mean that we should never improve non-constraints? Not really. Because again, we are saying non-constraints are also important. So it's not that we should never improve them. Okay, then what are the considerations? When should we improve? When we should not improve? Okay, let me answer the first question. Does excess capacity equals to waste? Many experts may say yes, but my answer is yes and no. Yes, if its output is just piling up, it is not consumed by the subsequent resources. And the answer is no. If the fluctuations in the process after it are starved for more inventory. So because this constraint is having a lot of fluctuations, the machines after that are waiting for the material to receive. Then in that case, you need to improve that non-constraint. But then it is a protective capacity, it is not excess capacity, right? Do we clearly understand the difference between protective capacity, excess capacity, what these jargons are? Let's try to define them. First of all, let's talk about productive capacity. Okay, what is productive capacity? Productive capacity is the capacity that we need to produce. That is equivalent to the capacity of the constraint. What the constraint produce, we should be able to process. That's the bare minimum capacity. To give you a very quick example, if the constraint has the capacity, say, of 100 units, then capacity of all non-constraint is more than 100 units. So their productive capacity is 100 units. Over and above that is what that we are discussing now. After that, we talk about protective capacity. Now, what is this protective capacity? Is that there is a variation in that non-constraint or the processes before and after. So from time to time, those non-constraint need to produce more to cope up with the work. That is called protective capacity, to protect the constraint from starving for material. Now, anything over and above protective capacity can be termed as excess capacity. Anything over and above the protective, so we have protective capacity plus protective capacity, and if you have capacity more than that, it is excess capacity. And any of these capacities, like protective capacity or excess capacity, are not being used. They are idle capacity. They are waiting. They are idle for the time being. So these are the types of capacities of the non-constraints. Now, what is the impact of improving non-constraints? We definitely need protective capacity for non-constraints to take care of variations and to prevent the constraint from starving forward. If you are able to reduce the processing time of the non-constraint up to constraint, you are likely to need less WIP. Are you getting my point? Say there is a five machines process A, B, C, D, E, and say process C is the constraint. If you are able to reduce the processing time for A and B, it means the inventory that is flowing can be reduced. And if you are able to reduce the processing time after the constraint, that is the resource D and E, then you can deliver it faster. So there is a definite advantage in improving this non-constraint before the constraint and after the constraint. Now I'm confused. All along I was saying that focus your attention on improving the constraint. Now I'm pointing out that there is an advantage if we improve non-constraints also. So what should I do? Okay, what should I do? Okay, now let us go slowly and systematically. After we are exhausted all the opportunities to improve the constraint. Okay, after we have sorry, 1 minute. Okay, after we are exhausted all the opportunities to improve the constraint, we should look at non-constraints. First, we should check the protective capacity of the non-constraints and improve those non-constraints that do not have sufficient protective capacity. Now, how do you know what is sufficient, what is not sufficient? That is where you have to look at the recent past. How many times the constraint had to wait for the material to arrive? So there will point to a particular resource which from time to time is not producing as per expectation because it goes down, or there is some quality problem, or there is some variability. Note that once you improve the constraint, the demand on non-constraint also goes up. How come? When your constraint, they were identified the constraint, typically you will find that it is not working as per according to its capacity. Once you exploit it and subordinate it well, then you will find that it is working to its capacity, so it is producing more. So when constraint produces more, it is going to demand more material from the previous units, and it is going to supply more work to the machines after that. So it is likely the demand on non-constraint is likely to increase. So you may, to begin with, you may find that you have enough productive capacity, but as the constraint improves, you may find that it is no longer adequate. So you need to do something about it. Now, if you don't do that, this can starve the constraint for work, and it will therefore jeopardize the throughput. So periodically, we should check and satisfy ourselves that we have enough protective capacity. So how do we go about it? First, focus on constraint, do as many improvements are possible. Then we are almost done. Look at the protective capacities around you and take suitable action. But be careful. Be careful. Do not jump into improving everything. Start with the constraint, and once you have exhausted all the avenues to improve the constraint, then carefully choose the improvement initiative. Consider the impact of improvement on throughput, inventory, and operating expenses. Typically, reducing inventory and lead time has favorable impact on throughput, inventory, and operating expense. So look at that. Some improvements may have direct impact on the two necessary conditions. What necessary condition that I'm talking about? The necessary conditions to the goal. The goal, if we take it as to make more money now as well as in the future, the first necessary condition is to provide Okay, so it's to satisfy the market now as well as in the future, and to create satisfying work environment now as well as in the future. Now, some improvements may not directly impact your throughput, may not even do anything with the inventory, or it might even increase some operating expenses, but it may have direct impact on these two necessary conditions. So don't ignore that. It is not always necessary to have big improvement programs. You know, we gather all the requirements and say, this is all we are going to improve. On the contrary, you should choose small improvements, execute them quickly, reap benefits, enjoy the results, and let people see it happening. See, this is the best thing to do to get people on board. If you do some small improvements and people in front of their eyes, they see, oh, now the things are going faster and better, they will be all with you. That will boost their morale, and they will be more enthusiastic about your improvement. If you don't do that, people will say, oh, it's a management fad, or it's an improvement program for the month. Every month, management keeps coming up with some improvement, and they will not be interested, they will neglect it, they will not participate in it, they will not cooperate. So don't try to come with big bang approach every time. Just start with some small improvements here and there. There may be some improvements that are not likely to have direct impact on throughput or inventory or operating expenses. I'm repeating this. Sometimes it is not feasible to quantify the improvement. However, they may significantly improve the necessary conditions or add to ease of working or enable you to manage the constraint better. Such improvements also need to be considered. Typically, you should create a list of improvements that are needed, then prioritize them on the impact of T, I, OE, and two necessary conditions. Consider it, though this can't be done by computer. You can't feed the data and let the computer decide priority. You have to look at what you are going to get. Sometimes some improvements which are not impacting throughput, you might want to give top priority. These are reasons for that. So you need to carefully decide on that. It is important to note that we should not start all the improvements at one point of time. This may cause spreading of resources such as people, money, etc. And management attention also will get divided. And the result may take unduly long and people might lose interest. So what is the most ideal improvement? The most ideal improvement could be the ones that increase throughput while simultaneously reducing inventory and operating expenses and improve the necessary conditions. Now, so therefore, we need to take a holistic view of the system and decide what to improve. Having said that, most improvements will not address all these 5 things. So that is where you need to look at it and take a qualitative decision as to how you want to go about improvements. Now, let us come back to non-consent. I talked a lot about that, but I digress into improvements. So, what can we do if we have significant amount of excess capacity in certain non-consents? The first reaction is we should try to trim it, lay off people, or sell some machines. But it may not always be feasible. It may not always be even be good, even though it is feasible. Or should we try to create some new product using this non-consent, but not needing the constraint? No. What is it? See, you have several machines or several non-constraints which are excess capacity. That capacity is lying idle. Can you think of a product which does not require a constraint, but it can be processed by non-constraint and you can sell it in the market? In TOC terminology, they are called free products. No, they are not actually free. You pay for the material, but for rest like labor and all that, you already paid. They are there with you. Machines are already there with you. So you have a good chance of making a lot of money out of it. But again, you can do that with some caution. But that is That is one way recommended by TOC. That try to make create some new products which use non-consents but they don't need consent. Or it could be that take some outside work. It is not always necessary that we outsource, but we insource also. Take some outside work and deliver it by using your non-consents, right? Now, having said that, let me go back to what I had written on our WhatsApp and as well as on LinkedIn. That we know about consent, but okay, we are seeing the difference between consent, obstacle, and bottleneck, right? So you might be aware of them, you may not be. If you are not, you have learned something. Then we talked about not having only one consent, but having two consents. I guess most of you were not prepared for this the answer that I provided. Also, we had a look at the consent and leverage point, and then we took an example of exploiting the consent fully, right, at 100% capacity, and you people have given excellent answers. Then we talked about where the consent should reside, internally, externally, what are the criteria and all that. And we talked about how to deal with non-consents. Should we improve them or not improve them? Or if you want to improve them, then how we should go about them. And then we talked about the different types of capacities, that excess capacity and protective capacity and all that. And then finally we had a look at one interesting quiz or example or exercise, which I expect you guys to answer me on WhatsApp. So here I am. I am done with my presentation. I exceeded the time, but I hope you don't mind. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, any comments?
Yes, thanks a lot. I've got up really early to attend, and it was worth the while, and I've learned something. So it's a good start into the day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Thanks, Michael. Okay, any other comment?
Good session, Rajiv.
Yeah. Yeah, tell me.
As usual, the session was good. Again, for me, there were some Oshit moments.
Huh? Oh, surprise.
For me, there were some Oshit moments wherein I had a different perspective, and after being in so long, I still realized that okay, the definition can still be simpler.
Okay. So let us close this session.
Yes.
Thanks for your time and patience. I enjoyed talking to you and hope
Rajiv, Rakesh here.
Yeah, Rakesh ji, boliye.
Yeah, this was the first time, in fact, I was part of the discussion, and thanks for that, Rajiv, owing to the time differences and time zones. But yeah, definitely it was very enlightening, and I'll try to make myself across this every time I'm getting an invite to Rajiv. Thanks for that.
Okay. You're welcome, Rakesh ji.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.